Good morning and welcome to Class 13 of Developmental Psychology, Psych 250 at the NDSU Summer Term 2017. Today we're going to be talking about emotional and social development in middle childhood. This will be the last class in our series on middle childhood, and then we have our midterm exam tomorrow. And then when we come back from the 4th of July, we will have, we'll start our second half of the semester and we'll start talking about adolescence and then adulthood. So just some housekeeping. We do have our exam review tonight from 5 to 6. If you're coming to campus, it's in Menard 232. I'll send out my telephone number. You can text me when you get to campus because I'm pretty sure they locked the door. So if you can't get in the front door, just send me a text message and I'll come let you in. If you can, then the department, I think, locks at 5. So I'll come check at 5 o'clock if anyone's there. You can still text me if you're sitting at the department and need to get in. If you can't... What is this? If you can't come into, sorry, my computer just asked me if I wanted to change the color scheme. I'm like, why would I want to do that? Leave me alone. If you can't come to campus, then there are instructions on Blackboard under exam and under the midterm exam for how to join the review using Google Hangouts, which is a free program that allows you to video chat with people. You'll need to, however, what you'll need to do is read those instructions beforehand, because you do have to download a plugin for your computer if you've never used Hangouts before. But if you have a Google account, like a Gmail account or something like that, you'll be able to use Hangouts no problem. You'll just need to get the plugin. Please email me and let me know if you're planning on coming. Otherwise, I'll be on campus because the internet's better there and I have got the ability to use a webcam on campus. If you are going to come though, I would really appreciate it if you would let me know so that I know who to expect. Otherwise, if no one's going to come at all, then there's no point in me coming back up to campus this evening. Our exam opens tonight online at 11:59 p.m. and you have until 11:59 p.m. on Friday to complete it. So you only have 24 hours to complete it. You can use your book, you can use your notes. Please do not use the internet or watch the videos again. You should be able to complete the multiple choice in about 40 minutes. I mean, I've seen people take 50 minutes to complete it, but honestly, if you have your book and your notes, it shouldn't take you that long to complete it. There is an essay, though, and so you need to plan for that as well. You have a whole 80 minutes to take the exam, and after 80 minutes, it's going to auto-submit, and there's no way for you to fix any of the mistakes that you made or to finish the essay if you started it. So if it takes you a while to write, you might want to scroll down and start the essay first. You should not wait until 11 o'clock to take this exam. I would say take it no later than 9 o'clock tonight. Now, if you have any problems with the exam, you can email me. Granted, I don't know when I'm going to bed tonight. I'm probably not going to stay up till midnight, so I will make every endeavor to answer the questions that you have if there's a problem. Or I guess going to bed Friday, because I would definitely be asleep tonight when the exam opens. If you have a problem, though, with the exam while you're taking it, email me and I'll make every endeavor to respond, but I can't promise that I'll respond after 5 or 6 in the evening, because that's usually when I stop looking at my emails. Then we are off Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for the 4th of July. You're welcome. The university only requires that we're off Tuesday, but I've given you 3 days, so enjoy 5 days of vacation. I am definitely going to enjoy 5 days of vacation. So look forward to that. And then we'll come back on Thursday and we'll start talking about adolescent development. If you have any questions in the meantime about any of this information, please send me an email, or I'll be in the office this afternoon from 2 to 5. So if you wanted to come visit, I'll be in the office. What else? Oh, and if you have any questions about the exam, like material on the exam, you can submit those on the discussion board. I'll continue to check that until this evening, and then it will no longer be available to you at 11:59 p.m. So I will make every effort to answer your questions. If I see the question and I don't answer it until like 11 o'clock, I'll email you the answer to it as well, so that you can get that answer and not have to be locked out of the discussion board and not get the answer. In terms of emotional development, in middle childhood we see a greater independence and feelings of pride and guilt. In other words, people, when they get to middle childhood, are able to control what makes them feel guilty and what makes them feel prideful. It's not as much controlled by external forces. We also see greater understanding that people can feel two emotions at once. So in other words, for example, I'm moving back to Alabama in a couple weeks, and I'm sad about that because I have friends here, and I've lived here for almost 3 years, and I've gotten accustomed to it. But I'm also happy because I'm looking forward to being closer to my family. I'm looking forward to being able to order sweet tea when I go to a restaurant. I'm looking forward to eating fried chicken again. I'm also looking forward to living 2.5 hours from the beach. So that is something that I'm incredibly excited about. So I can feel two emotions at once, and most small children can't get that. You're either happy or sad or angry or whatnot. But when you move into middle childhood, you can actually tell and understand that people can feel multiple emotions. We also see greater empathy and altruistic behavior. So children in middle childhood are more empathetic, and they're also more giving. They're not as self-centered. And that's not a bad thing. Children in early childhood need to be self-centered because they're still trying to understand who they are, and it would be way too complicated if they also are trying to understand who other people are and how other people feel. We also start to see greater emotional regulation. Children in middle childhood are able to control their feelings and control how their feelings control them. With emotion development, we do see the development of coping strategies. And coping strategies are things that we do really without thinking that help us alleviate some of our emotional distress at problems that we experience. And there are two main categories of coping. The first is problem-centered coping. And problem-centered coping are strategies that work on reducing the problem. So if you say are getting overwhelmed by the fact that you have a lot of bills to pay, and you've gotten behind in doing that, and they're all due at the end of the day, then an example of problem-centered coping would be making a list of how you're going to tackle this task, what bills you're going to pay first, how you're going to pay them, and you would perhaps get everything spread out on a table. You'd have your list, you'd have your checkbook or credit card and computer or phone or however, stamps, envelopes, however you pay your bills, and you'd get it all laid out, and you'd have a plan. You'd create a plan about how you're going to deal with that. And the goal would be to reduce the anxiety and the overwhelming feeling that you feel. An alternative way would be emotion-centered coping, and these are strategies that work on reducing negative emotions evoked by the problem. So going back to our bill example, I guess maybe a little self-disclosure, I have bills I have to pay today, so that's why I thought of it. I hate the end of the month. It's like you get paid, but the minute you get paid, it's like everything goes out. It's like you start out with $5, you get paid, and then you end the day with $5 because you've paid everything out. Yay, adulting. I every time I teach this class, I think, times were so simple back then, back when I was a kid. I wish I could go back to those good old days. But an example of emotion-centered coping with this scenario is you would perhaps sit on your couch and say, okay, what am I feeling right now? Okay, I'm feeling anxiety. What can I do to alleviate the anxiety? And so you focus on the emotion and you focus on ways that you can alleviate that. Maybe some deep breathing, maybe watching Netflix and putting it off, which might actually make you more anxious, at least from my personal experience. Taking a walk around your neighborhood to clear your mind and get yourself calmed down before you go in to do the work. And so effective coping can take either form. You can have problem-centered, you can have emotion-centered. Honestly, a combination of both is the most effective. You know, you could say, well, I'm going to take a walk around, I'm going to literally walk around the block to cool off and to calm down, and then I'm going to come back and come up with a plan of how I'm going to tackle this. And so you're doing both at the same time. And when you do that, you lower the anxiety, you lower the issue, the feeling that you have, the visceral response you're having, and then you come up with a plan so that you don't get overwhelmed again. So both are really effective, but it doesn't matter whichever you choose. It really depends on your personality. I tend to do both. Children in middle childhood also have a more sophisticated self-concept, so they understand themselves a lot better. And you'll recall we talked last week about self-concept, and this is basically how we see ourselves. And we talked about how in early childhood children tend to see themselves and define themselves in terms of how they feel and what they own, their possessions. But when we move into childhood, or we move into middle childhood, we start to see a move from the description of concrete traits, such as I am happy, I have a fire engine, to psychological traits, or more abstract traits. Things like I am loyal, I love people. These are psychological traits. They're not concrete. Because love, what does love mean? What does that actually mean? That's not a concrete idea. They talk about general dispositions. I am a cheerful person. And that's different than happy, because happy is I am currently happy, whereas I am generally cheerful. I am generally helpful. Focus on competencies. I'm good at math. I'm good at singing. I like to draw pictures. I'm a good artist. Also focus on positive and negative traits. So, you know, I'm really friendly, but sometimes I get overwhelmed because I help people too much. Would be an example of understanding both positive and negative things about ourselves and how that defines our identity. And also, we see a greater reliance on social identities, and this comes about because we have more empathy, more altruism, more awareness of other people. And so we're able to see ourselves through other people's eyes and to see ourselves and how we fit into society. So for me, one of my social identities is I'm a teacher. I teach at NDSU, I teach in the community, I'm an advocate for transgender people, and that involves me to teach people in the community. I am a CEO. I run a nonprofit foundation that I founded, and that for me is a social identity. I am an Anglican. I attend an Episcopal church and follow Anglican religious practice. That is a social identity for me that's important. And so when you move into middle childhood, you start to see yourself in those terms because you're no longer focusing on your internal world, you're also looking at how you relate to the external world. And with this, we see self-esteem change and develop in a more sophisticated way. It becomes much more differentiated. So in other words, we don't just have this global self-esteem where I'm just generally feel good about myself or feel bad about myself. We have social self-esteem, we have academic self-esteem, we have self-esteem about our appearance, about our athletic capabilities. And so it's possible for a person to have high social self-esteem and high academic self-esteem, but have low self-esteem about their physical appearance and their athletic ability. So all of that contributes, of course, to your global self-esteem, but we start to think of ourselves in terms of the different spheres in which we inhabit, the different competencies that we have. So for me, I have very high social self-esteem and very high academic self-esteem. I don't like the way I look, and I don't not athletic at all. So my self-esteem about these things are very low. And it's very apparent to me that this is the case when I am shopping for clothes and when I'm trying to do something athletic. I always feel very self-conscious and feel really bad about myself because I have very low academic or very low physical and athletic self-esteem. So, and if you were to think about it, you could probably think about how you have varying levels of self-esteem depending on what you're talking about or the context. So some people could have social self-esteem that's really high when they're around their friends, but when they're not around their friends, they have really low self-esteem. And that is possible. It's not always a given. Usually if someone has low social self-esteem as a whole, they're going to be lower in self-esteem in all contexts. But you could be, like for example, and this happens for me, I have very high social self-esteem when I'm around people who accept my transgender identity. When I'm around people who don't, I don't have as good, my social self-esteem is not as high because I'm having to combat these people, the ugly looks and the people misgendering me or using the wrong name, and that makes me feel bad about myself. And so that could be an example of how it could differentiate. We do see a decrease in self-esteem during the transition to middle childhood. So we talked about last week how children in early childhood have really high self-esteem. They think they're the best at everything, which is really good because they're basically incompetent at everything. And they really need to have high self-esteem in order to develop a good, positive sense of self. Speaking of self-esteem, I just got a really upsetting email. Okay. But we start to see this very much decrease in middle childhood, and the reasons for this is children start to become more realistic. They have a much clearer picture of who they are and their abilities, and so that makes them less inflated, their self-esteem less inflated. Now that doesn't mean that they have low self-esteem, that just means that self-esteem that they had was overinflated and it starts to reduce and become more normal. Another reason that this decrease happens is because of social comparisons. We compare ourselves to people who are like us, to our peers. If you've ever sat in a class and gotten an exam back, and ask someone what grade they got on the exam, you're engaging in social comparison. You're trying to see how you compare to the other people around you. And so people in middle childhood start to do this because they're more aware of other people and not just of themselves, and so they compare themselves to other people. And if they feel like they're lesser than, that could reduce self-esteem. Now if they're better than, or feel that they're better than, that could increase their self-esteem. We also get more performance feedback in middle childhood, so like grades. We get comments from trusted adults on our appearance, on our ability to do work. We are always being told that we're wonderful. We start to get more realistic feedback from the people who we trust and who we rely on. We also have greater reliance on what's called the looking glass self, and the looking glass self is the way that we see ourselves through the eyes of other people. And so essentially what this means is we interact with people and we have our own perceptions about how they see us, and that affects our self-esteem. So if your primary identity is that of a wife and mother, and I think for at least 3 people in this class that may be your primary identity, that is something from which you derive great strength and purpose in life, and that's just wonderful. My mother, for the majority of her adult life, that was her primary identity. She's gone back to work now, but it gave her a great sense of purpose, being a wife and mother. So the looking glass self of a wife and mother would be how you perceive that your spouse, so your husband or wife or other partner, sees you as a wife and mother, or do they perceive you to be competent? Are you fulfilling their expectations? You see yourself through the eyes of your children. Am I meeting my children's expectations? You see yourself through the eyes of your mother and your father. Am I meeting their expectations? Am I living up to the standard that they set for me? You see yourself through the eyes of the society as a whole. And this can be especially stressful and potentially self-esteem crushing if you're a mother, a woman of color, and you are a single mother, which a lot of times, if you are Black or Latina or Native, you, statistically speaking, are much more likely to be a single mother. And we have in society this very negative view of people of color who are single mothers. And so every time anything bad happens, you fail as, so quote unquote, fail as a mother, or your child does something wrong, which in any other situation we probably would just say, well, they're a child, but it's not a big deal. Immediately your sense of self goes down because you perceive that people are judging you for that. Now, white women who are also single mothers go through the same thing, because we tend to view single mothers as promiscuous and irresponsible, when the reality is, where's the dad? Where's the dad in this situation? Like, did he just abandon his child? Like, what's going on here? Like, why are we judging mom so harshly? It's not like she was the only person involved in this situation. Or maybe dad was awful and abusive, and mom is doing the best that she can to protect the baby or the child or whoever, and herself, and give them a healthy environment. So, like, our looking glass self then is the way that we perceive other people to perceive us. And so a lot of times we project our own negative self-esteem on other people. So like, if you have low social self-esteem, you may project that low self-esteem on how other people see you. So you may feel that you're incompetent in social situations, and everyone around you thinks that you are competent in social situations and loves having you around. But because you believe that you're incompetent, you perceive that other people also perceive that about you. And so looking glass self can be very, very, very misleading, but it's something that we start to rely on, especially in middle childhood, but it gets even worse in adolescence. And then it gets not really worse, it kind of maintains itself in early adulthood, and then we move into middle adulthood, and by that point, I mean, I'm not speaking from personal experience, but this is what my mother has told me and what other people who I know are in middle adulthood have told me. By the time you get to your 40s and 50s, you really don't care what people think anymore. And by the time you're in your 60s and 70s, you really do not give a damn. Like, my grandmother was like, she said it was one of the most liberating experiences becoming an older adult, because she could literally do whatever she wanted and wear whatever she wanted, and it didn't matter. And she's like, you know what, used to have all these beliefs that were so important to me. This is what she told me when I came out as trans. But you know what, I don't care. I'm old. I just want my family around me. I want them to be kind to each other, and I don't care what you wear or how you identify. I just love you, and that's all that matters. This is from like a very conservative Southern Christian grandma, and she's just like, whatever, like, I'm an old lady. I don't have much time left. I got like 20 years left. I don't care what you want to do, who you love, or how you dress. I just want you to hang out with me, and that's all that matters to me. I cannot wait. I'm literally looking forward to the day. I mean, I'm already kind of there, and I'm only 25 years old, and I really don't care what people think about me, obviously, because I overshare all the time in this class. But I literally cannot wait to be a 60-year-old woman and just do whatever I want and not care. Like, that to me seems like the goal in life, is to get to that point, to that stage, and like, just be who you want to be. And I think there's something about being a mom that really, or a dad, but especially a mom, or maybe not especially mom, but especially the primary caregiver, so you're the one that you're always, like, you have some, like, one or two kids attached to you at all times, like, clinging to you, and you're sitting there trying to use the bathroom, they're banging on the door. There's something about being a mother or a father who's the primary caregiver, and really stopping, like, ending this ridiculous practice of caring what other people think about you. I went to this one last story and then we'll move on. But I went to Nicole's in downtown Fargo with a friend of mine, and I won't give you any more information to protect her identity. I don't doubt that she, there's no such thing as doubt. I know that she doesn't care, would not care about me telling you the story. But we literally were having, like, she brought her kid because, her husband was at work, and it was her day off, and he didn't go to daycare because it was her day off, so she brought her kid, and we were having, I was having key lime pie, it was amazing, and we had this great conversation, and she literally said, it's so nice, like, going out and, like, having an adult conversation and feeling like an adult again instead of a child, because I spent all my free time with this 3-year-old monkey, and we're literally walking out the door, and, like, she's like, oh no, and I look around, and literally the kid had like, pooped in his diaper, and it was, like, coming out of the diaper, like, there was so much of it, and he'd been bouncing around so much, that it was literally, like, seeping out of the top, and it was just, like, sliding out of the top of his pants, and it was, like, in the middle of Nicole's, and she's just like, whatever, and she was like, did you poop yourself, like, out loud, and I was like, I have 6 younger siblings, so obviously I'm not mortified by this, I'm just like, whatever, but she just said it so matter-of-factly and so resignedly, and I was like, this is what it means to be a parent. You literally stop caring what people think. It's like, you are raising the next generation, and you deserve honor and praise for that. So, my life goals are either to be a mom so that I can reach that next level of not caring, or to be an old lady so that I can really, really not care what people think about me. And, like, shatter that looking glass self and say, bye. Okay, with these increases that we see to self-esteem and our self-concept, we start to see what's called perspective taking. And perspective taking, that should be taking, not thinking. Perspective taking is, let me fix that, it's bothering me. I hate finding all of these mistakes, like, it really bothers me, because I feel like it communicates to others that I didn't prepare, when the reality is I've looked at these slides so many times that I just can't see when there's anything wrong with them. So what am I engaging in? Looking glass self. I'm projecting my own sense of inadequacy on others. Okay. Perspective taking is considering the thoughts of others. So in other words, you are thinking about how other people are thinking. And this is a very important thing to do. It's not that's intrinsically bad. It can be harmful to us in a way if we over-rely on our perspective taking, but it is helpful. It's important for referential communication. In other words, talking to people about things that they're experiencing. So, for example, yesterday I went to lunch with a friend of mine, and he looked really sad. And so I was taking his perspective, and I'm like, wonder what he's thinking about. Is he sad because I'm moving? Is he sad because something happened to himself? And so obviously my question was, what's going on? What can I do to help you? You seem sad. That's referential communication. Without being able to consider another person's feelings, I wouldn't have been able to engage in that. Perspective taking also helps us understand other people's emotions. So if we see someone who's sad and we listen to why they're sad, we're able to understand it. It's not like someone says, well, I'm sad because I just broke up with my boyfriend, and we're just like, well, that's stupid. Like, why would you feel sad about that? He was an asshole. And yes, he probably was. Men, statistically speaking, tend to be. If you're one of those men, like one of the 2 men in this class, I know at least one of you personally, and I know that you're not, but I don't know about the other one. I have good feelings about you, though, because you do your homework on time, so. Where was I going with that? Oh, but, you're able to understand if you are engaging in perspective taking that while, we do, as women, often, and I'm sorry, guys, there are more women in this class, and so I forget sometimes, and it doesn't help either one of you that you have gender-neutral names, and so I just kind of assume everyone in the class is a woman, because I don't have pictures, your pictures don't come up next to your name, so, I love this class. This class is so much fun. I normally have like 200 or so students, and so it's like impossible to really get to know each of you, but I actually feel like I know all of you really well, even though I've never like seen most of you face to face, because of your discussion board questions that you do so well on. Okay, so anyway, even though we oftentimes love people who are undeserving of our love, it still hurts when we have to disconnect from that relationship. And so being able to take perspective in another person helps you to understand why that emotion is valid, even if we ourselves are like overjoyed that they're no longer in an abusive situation. Perspective taking does play into our self-concept and self-esteem, as we've just talked about. It contributes to the looking glass self. It also helps us with inferences of other people's intentions. So we're able to think about, okay, what does this person intend by what they're saying or by their action? So say, this happens in the South a lot, I don't know if it happens up here as much, but you run into someone you haven't seen in a long time, and they're like, oh hey, how are you? I miss you. And you're like, well, you have my phone number, we're friends on Facebook, why didn't you reach out? And so they're like, oh, let's like get together and have a coffee or something. And you're like, why do you want to do that? Like, we literally are friends on Facebook, and I see you post every day, and I post every day, and you haven't, like, reached out, so why are you reaching out now? Like, what's going on? So you're, like, trying to figure out, based on your perspective of who they are and what they feel, what they're trying to get from you. Or what they think about you, or what their intentions towards you are. And we do this a lot when it comes to relationships. Someone expresses interest in us, and we're like, oh, hi. Like, what are your intentions? Are you interested? And you kind of like go off of their emotions and the way that they act and the things that they do to try to figure out, like, what do they want? What is their intention here? So perspective taking really enhances our ability not only to understand our own emotions and the emotions of others, but also to engage in interpersonal relationships. Selman came up with different stages about perspective taking, and it's called Selman's perspective taking stages. And it's a stage theory, and it outlines changes in perspective taking. And so this theory has what's called invariant sequence. Excuse me. Okay, so what that means is it's unchanging. It doesn't vary. So, for example, some stage theories may be variant, meaning that you can kind of go through the different stages at there's not a set order. You just go through these different levels. But an invariant sequence means you have to actually progress through each level without any changes. It's also universal. It means that it affects everyone. It's not based on gender, it's not based on ethnicity, this affects everyone. And stages mark qualitatively distinct ways of thinking. In other words, at each stage you are thinking in a distinctly different way. It's not like you're building upon something, you're literally changing the way that you think. And he proposes that these changes in our perspective taking occur because we're able to decenter from our own perspective. In other words, we're only able to see these improvements in our perspective taking because we're becoming less reliant on thinking about ourselves and how we see things and how we feel. According to this theory, our progression through the stages is influenced by, one, parenting style. So if you have parents who use a more open parent style, more positive parenting style, where they work on warm relationships and facilitate self-exploration, you tend to move through the stages a lot quicker. It is moderately related to intelligence, so people who have higher levels of intelligence tend to move through the stages faster and get higher in the stages. And also sociodramatic play plays a very important role because this requires you to act out social situations. And the act of playing with dolls actually is incredibly helpful for perspective taking, and is perhaps why girls tend to be much more emotionally mature than boys, because when you're playing with dolls, the two dolls are talking to each other, so you're having to create two different identities, two different ways of thinking for two different objects. Ultimately, you're controlling that, but it's requiring your brain to make these distinctions and to practice it. And the more you practice it, the better you become at your own emotional development. So walking through the stages, we have level 0. So this is the baseline. Like 0, like how do you even know it's level 0? Like it doesn't make any sense. Think of this as like you're at the front door. And this stage is called the undifferentiated stage. And this happens from the ages of about 3 to 6. So until this point, there is no perspective taking whatsoever. You're completely centered on yourself. At level 0, children know the self, and they have the concept that other people have different thoughts, but the child has trouble differentiating between the two. So in other words, I'm gonna use myself as an example. Okay, so little Darcy is 3 years old, and she knows that she has a self, right? And she sees herself as a woman, or as a little girl. And she understands that other people may think differently about that. But she often confuses the two. So she'll think that some people do see her as a girl because she herself sees herself as a girl. So in other words, children in this stage have a hard time making the distinction between the way that they think and the way that other people think. Then you move into level 1 about the age of 4, and that lasts till about the age of 9. And this is called the social informational perspective. And during this level, children understand that people can hold different perspectives due to having different information. In other words, if we're using our example, I personally know that I see myself as a girl because I have the information that I feel that way. Whereas my dad, at the time, did not see me as a girl because he didn't know that that's how I felt. So his perspective was based on the information that he had. My perspective was based on the information that I had. Then we move into level 2, and this happens about the age of 7 and goes to about the age of 12. So it could happen earlier and go later, depending on where you are maturity-wise. And at level 2, children can step into another person's shoes and view their own thoughts, feelings, and behavior from someone else's perspective. And so this is where we're in middle childhood here, right? And so you're able to literally think about how other people feel about you or other people feel about situations. So in my example, I could step into my dad's shoes and view his own thoughts. Well, he has certain expectations for me, his own feelings. He loves me, but he loves this idea of me. And behavior, he treats me the way that he does because of how he perceives me. And so that would be stepping into another person's shoes. You're not judging someone else's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors based off of your understanding or your belief system. Because really, that's not incredibly fair, right? If you're going to judge people based on where you are, because you're saying, well, you should have had the same experience as me, when a lot of times people haven't. Which is why, from my perspective, I'm able to accept when people don't accept me. Not accept it in the sense that I'm okay with it, but accept that it's a reality, because I realize that a lot of people have never thought about this before, and I remember what it was like not having thought about this before. And so, it's easy for me to be a little bit more magnanimous, I guess, and say, well, let me help you get to where I want you to be, and where I know that you ultimately want to be as well. Level 3, this is called third-party perspective taken. Well, taking it on. Third party's perspective taking, and this happens about the age of 10 to 15, so you see this one would go to 12, so this could happen depending on how mature. It could happen a lot earlier, and while a lot of people are still in level 2, and go to age of 4 to 15. And at this stage, so this is late middle childhood and adolescence, children and early adolescence, children can step outside of a two-person situation and imagine how the self and other are viewed from the perspective of a third party. In other words, using my example, I, as a 12-year-old girl, can step out of the situation and say, okay, I can see how I view the situation, I can see how my dad views the situation. I'm going to look at it from how my mom views it now. because I know my mom has her own perspective about all of this based on the information that she has and her personal experience, her upbringing in a much more progressive home. Then we move into level 4, and you can see there's a little overlap in the age. It starts as early as 14 and goes through adulthood. And this is societal perspective taking. And this is when we can understand that a third party's perspective, so a person that's not us and not the other person in our situation, in our one-on-one dyadic experience, we can understand that that third party's perspective can be influenced by a larger societal value. In other words, going to my example, I understand that my mom's view of my dad's relationship with me is based on her societal value, her understanding of how society works and how it views a person's gender identity. And so, that is a very high-level, sophisticated way of perceiving things. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't always get here, or don't get here in a very sophisticated way. A lot of times we have trouble considering things from a larger societal viewpoint because we just assume that our viewpoint is accurate. It is what society wants us to think, or what society thinks as a whole. When the reality is, when you think about a larger societal value in a country like the United States, we're such a large country that there really isn't a single societal value. There are multiple societal values. And you have to really, really go out to the bigger picture and realize the only thing that most Americans share in common is this belief that everyone should have the freedom to make decisions for themselves, and that everyone should have the ability to speak their mind freely and practice their belief system without the fear of persecution from their government. That's really the only thing that we all have in common. Unfortunately, we don't focus on that. We focus on the nitty-gritty of individual belief systems, which I think is not incredibly sophisticated or mature. But anyway, that's a question for another day. But it is important because now it leads into our next topic, which is moral development. And I have trouble with this term moral, because moral is really based on, morals themselves are based on a lot of times religious, has a lot of religious connotations, whereas ethics are more our societal contract with each other. What we agree as a society is acceptable or not acceptable, whereas morals tend to be focused on beliefs. But let's talk about moral development. Moral development in middle childhood sees changes in our understanding of what is moral or not, and it becomes much more flexible. So in early childhood, it's very rigid. Morality is very rigid. It's what I believe is moral is the only way. Whereas when you move into middle childhood, you start to see that morality is much more flexible, and it's based on situations, and personal experience and personal beliefs. In middle childhood, we start to recognize individual rights such as freedom of speech, religion, and personal safety. In other words, we start to see that people do have these larger, more abstract ideals that we strive for as a community. Unfortunately, we do start to see prejudice develop, and prejudice develops through in-group and out-group bias. So the in-group are people like you. So if you're a man, it's other men. If you're white, it's other white people. If you're gay, it's other gay people. And the out-group are people who are different than you. So if you're straight, it would be gay people. If you're white, it would be people who are not white. If you're a man, it's women. And this prejudice occurs because we have this fixed view of personality traits. In other words, we tend to, and this is not okay, but it's just how we've been conditioned, because we live in a very segregated society, but we tend to view all people within a group as a certain way. So I imagine that a lot of you came to this class, and when I came out as transgender, had some prejudice against me, and that's okay. It happens. I have prejudice against people who I don't know, because my personal experience tells me that most people do not treat me with respect, and so I tend to have a prejudice against people right from the bat, right from the start. It's hard for me to accept that people probably are not unaccepting. But you probably had your own fixed views of what a transgender person was like, and a lot of those views are probably the result of the media and portrayals of trans people in the news and on television, or, you know, from political debates. And so, if you have this fixed view of personality traits, you tend to be much more prejudiced, because you just assume that everybody in that group is that way. And if you don't like those traits, then it's going to make you prejudiced. Now, it could be that you think that, you know, and I use trans as an example a lot, not because I'm trying to push anything, but because I don't feel comfortable, like, speaking for other communities. But, like, if we all see trans people as being, like, if we all see them as gay people, that's going to affect the way that we view them. People who are high in self-esteem also tend to have more in-group, out-group bias. And you're like, wait, but self-esteem's a good thing. Well, yes, and if you think you're really, you personally are really amazing, and the groups that you belong to are really amazing, you're going to be like, why doesn't everybody belong to this group? Being straight's awesome, why isn't everyone straight? Being cisgender is awesome, why isn't everyone cisgender? And so that inadvertently leads you to be more prejudiced, or opens the door for you to be more prejudiced. And we also, if you live in a highly categorized social world, tend to be more prejudiced. So in the United States, we have a very categorized social world. We very much cling to these terms that define who we are. Personally, I hate terms. I wish that we didn't have them. But unfortunately, we live in a society that categorizes people based on their identities. And so that opens the door to us becoming prejudiced, because we start to see distinctions between us versus them. Whereas in societies where people are free to live the lives that they want and embrace their own identities, and they're not judged for it, and the terms don't matter, people just accept people as who they are, you don't see as much prejudice. Now, that doesn't exist in a pure form, but we do see it in some countries, where who you are, who you love, what you wear, how you act, don't really matter. Who you pray to don't matter. It's whether or not you're a productive member of society that matters. We do see prejudice reduced when you have intergroup contact. So when you interact with people who are different than yourself, when you interact with people from the outgroup, you see that, oh, they're people just like me. They're just a little different. They have different hopes, dreams, and aspirations, or they have the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations. The way they want to get there is a little different, and that's okay. And so when you have intergroup contact, you start to see a reduction in prejudice. Which is why I like to talk about other groups other than just white, straight people, because now you're having contact with other things. And hopefully the result will be that you're more accepting and more understanding of people who are different, because as human service providers, you have to be that way. We also start to see changes in relationships with our people, same age peers. Peer groups. Our peer group is a collective of our peer groups are the primary pool from which we derive our friendships. And peer groups are collectives that generate standards for behavior with a clear leader and followers. And so, if you all think back to like elementary school, there's probably like a person within your entire class who is sort of the leader of the class. And this is different than a clique. Cliques are subgroups within a peer group. This is the larger group of people. There's usually someone within your peer group who is sort of the natural leader, and everyone kind of follows their lead. When we go into middle childhood, friendship becomes much more complex and psychologically based. It's a mutual relationship. You care about them, they care about you. Usually, we're friends with people who have highly similar personality characteristics. or personal characteristics, such as socioeconomic status. People who are poor tend to be friends with people who are poor. People who are rich tend to be friends with people who are rich. Now, that doesn't mean that people don't, say to hell with class distinctions and have friends in different social classes, but we tend to gravitate towards people who are like us. It's also highly stable. 50 to 70% of your friendships will endure across the school year. And as an extra credit for today, tell me if you are still friends with someone, like best friends, or good friends with someone who you met in the fall, okay? Since that's part of the school year. Now, granted, you're not middle childhood, so you could also just tell me, like, are you still friends with someone that you met in elementary school? That would be interesting too. So either one. They're also very influential when it comes to social development. Our friends are really the only people that we see, other than our parents, and maybe our grandparents and our aunt and uncle and ministers. But those people we don't see every day, but we see our friends at least 5 times a week when we're at school. And we see them more in some cases than we see our own parents, because we're with them for 8 hours a day, whereas we're not with our parents. I mean, we're with our parents for the rest of the day, but we're not awake for most of that time. So our friends really do influence how we develop socially, and our interactions with people who are our same age really define how we will be as adults in terms of our social skills and our social interaction. Now, we talked about gender identity development in early childhood. We still see changes to our gender identity as we move into middle childhood and adolescence and adulthood. So we'll talk about this more. We start to see, in terms of gender identity, gender stereotype beliefs becoming more rigid and pronounced. So children in early childhood tend to be pretty androgynous when it comes to the way that they dress, the way that they play, the way that they interact with peers. But then they start to, in middle childhood, become much more rigid in terms of gender roles and in terms of gender behaviors. Boys, more than girls, tend to be very rigidly conforming to gender. And this is because we have a much greater expectation placed on boys that say boys have to behave a certain way. We allow girls to be much more androgynous, and it's okay for the girls to be more androgynous, but for a guy to be more androgynous or for a guy to be feminine is really pretty taboo still in our society. And so boys tend to be kind of forced into this very rigid social role. Children in middle childhood engage in what's called self-evaluation of gender. We evaluate how gendered we are. And within that evaluation comes gender typicality. And gender typicality is our own measure of how well we conform to gender roles and behaviors. How much of a quote-unquote boy are you? How much of a girl are you? We also see gender contentedness, and this is the degree to which a child is content with their gender identity. So, is a child content being more feminine than masculine? Is a child content being more masculine than feminine? Is a child content just being sort of non-binary and not living in a masculine-feminine world? And within this self-evaluation, we also see pressure to conform, and this is the degree to which a child feels their parents or peers approve or disapprove to their gender identity. And so if there's high approval of gender identity, then there's not much pressure to conform. But if there is disapproval, then there is this pressure to conform, to become more gendered. The result of this in middle childhood is a lot of children make the decision in middle childhood as to whether or not they're going to stick to their gender identity or they're going to stick to the one that society has assigned for them. And this can be a huge turning point for a lot of children, whether or not they have healthy they start off their adult life in a healthy way, or they start off their adult life in an unhealthy way. So for me, I made the decision at the age of 11 to reject my gender identity, and I did not start my adult life off in a very healthy way, as an example. And for me, that was because I was gender atypical, I was not contented with my gender, and I felt this intense pressure to conform. So it's pretty important that children, and even in middle childhood, are still given a lot of freedom to explore their gender, and that parents and teachers make it clear that it's okay, that it's normal. The parent-child relationship is still very important in middle childhood. It's still one of the primary relationships. And a parent's parenting style plays a major role on development. And there are 3 parenting styles that we know and that we identified in developmental psychology. The first is authoritarian style. And this is inflexible with harsh rules and punishments. And a good example of the authoritarian style is Stan Smith from American Dad, where it's pretty inflexible and it's either my way or the highway. Authoritative, so different than authoritarian, is flexible and with reasonable rules and punishments. And so I'm trying to think of a good example of an authoritative parent from pop culture. I guess you could say Lois Griffin on Family Guy. I told you I like adult cartoons, right? Is pretty authoritative because, you know, it's not my way or the highway with her. She's more flexible. She's open. And she's warm with her children, though not with Meg. But Meg's an exception. Meg is awful and deserves to be made fun of. No, I'm kidding. That's awful. Meg, I feel sorry for Meg. And then there's permissive parenting, and this is where there are few rules with little punishment. So going back to American Dad, Francine Smith is an example of a permissive parent, where she doesn't really have any rules and she doesn't really punish anyone. You should go and watch, go to Netflix. I hope it's still there because they took off a lot of the episodes of American Dad. You should try to find this. Look for American Dad, Son of Stan. Let me see it's season 6, episode 2. I don't know if it's still on Netflix or not, but just watch it, okay? And in this episode, Stan is authoritarian and Francine is permissive. Together, they're authoritative. And so as a parent, you want to be an authoritative parent, okay? So at the end of the episode, they realize that they both balance each other out, and so together, when they work together, their child's better adjusted, and that's because together they represent what's really authoritative parenting. So as a parent, you want to be authoritative. You want to be flexible, you want to be reasonable, and you want to be not as harsh with your punishment. We do start to see in middle childhood a new element enter the parent-child relationship, and that is co-regulation. And this is when parents exercise general oversight with child making more day-to-day decisions. In other words, and this is more in late middle childhood moving into adolescence, the child is able to choose the clothes they want to wear, the friends that they have. They get to pick where they want to go, what they want to read, what TV show they want to watch. The parents just provide oversight, and they step in when it's not an appropriate decision. Now, this becomes much more sophisticated in adolescence. So there's still a lot of parental control here in the situation. I mean, obviously, a 11-year-old can't go to the mall by them. I mean, I guess they could, but they can't just walk to the mall by themselves. But they can ask to go, and they can make the decision that they want to go in a way that a child in early childhood could not. Within this parent-child relationship, the primary caregiver tends to be much more knowledgeable about their children's interests and concerns. And so the primary caregiver tends to be much closer to the children than the secondary caregiver. So in a lot of households, the mother is the primary caregiver, the one who is responsible for taking care of the child and making sure that their needs are met. The secondary caregiver is the person who is also responsible for the child, but they're not necessarily involved in every aspect of the child's daily care. We do see, though, that parents tend to be closer to their same-sex child. So dads tend to be closer to sons, and daughters tend to be closer to mothers. But that's not always the case. It just tends to be the case. And a lot of times that's a result of the fact that we live in a highly gender-segregated society. Sibling relationships are also very important to development. So they're highly important, but they're not essential. So if you're an only child, you're not at a disadvantage in any way. Sibling relationships do enter competition, though, into the mix. So there's a lot of competition in middle childhood with activities and competency diversified. And this is especially true if you have multiple siblings of the same or close age. And so if you have two siblings like 2 or 3 years apart and they both like soccer but one's better than the other, that leads to competition. Or they're both in band, one may be better than the other, and that leads to competition. But that's actually a good thing, because when you have competition, if you're really dedicated to something, it pushes you to be better. And so in that way, siblings can help you become more competent. Siblings do rely on each other for companionship and support, and our siblings often are our first friends and our best friends. We don't always realize that till later on, but siblings can be incredibly important. Now, you'll hear people say, well, the first child is this way, and the second child is this way, and the middle child's always this way, and the last child's always this way. Well, that is a lie. There's no major trait associated with birth order. First children are not intrinsically the natural leader. The youngest child is not always a brat. Now, one thing that we have found is that the youngest child tends to be the most emotionally well-developed of all the children. And that's because they have so many siblings. Well, I say so many, maybe they have one sibling. I'm thinking of my family where there's 7 of us, 7 of us kids. The youngest has so many siblings to look up to and to help mold their development. She literally, she has 3 siblings who are old enough to be her parent. And we all take a parental role in her life. We're all secondary caregivers, and so it's like she gets the benefit of having 5 parents instead of just 2. And let me say, that is one well-adjusted child. She knows who she is. She's proud of who she is. She understands her emotions. She communicates her emotions well. She is 6 years old, though, but I'll tell you, of all the children I've ever met, she's one of the most emotionally well-adjusted children I've ever met. Now, only children, we talked about that, how they're not disadvantaged by not having siblings. They do have one advantage. They tend to have higher self-esteem and perform better in school. The reason for that is because they tend to have more one-on-one attention from their parents, and that increases their ability to do well, which increases their self-esteem. So there are perks to being an only child. It's weird. I have no idea what it would be like to be an only child. I can't imagine it. I think it would be miserable. But my advisor is an only child, and she said she can't imagine what it would be like to have siblings, and she thinks it would be boring and annoying. So it's funny how our perspectives really alter the way that we view things. I mean, I literally could not imagine not having at least one sibling, because I mean, who do you go into battle with your parents with? Who's your ally in that? There are so many times that my siblings helped get me out of scrapes, and I did the same for them. I had a sibling one time that was going to get into huge trouble, and I was able to talk my parents out of it because I cared about that sibling and thought they were being unreasonable. If you're an only child, you don't have anybody looking out for your back. I just can't imagine not having a sibling. My sister, one of my middle sister's boyfriends broke up with her recently, and was a big jerk about it. And she was really upset, and I was ready to cut someone. I was like, he's lucky that I'm here in North Dakota because he is being a jerk, and I would tell him exactly how I feel if I was there. People have picked on my siblings before, and I have come down on them like a ton of bricks. I can't imagine not having someone to have your back. And so it's just weird to me to not have a sibling. But then again, I have 6 of them, and they're all younger than me, and so I guess that makes it a little different. if you're an only child, there's no bonus points, but I am curious, what is it like to be an only child? I don't get it. I just don't understand what it would be like to be an only child. I don't think I would enjoy it, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective. Or if your sibling is a twin, if you are, well, actually there's no one in the class who's a twin, but we actually had like 4 pairs of twins in the class last semester. Well, we had 4 people who were twins, their twin was not in the class, and so they actually filled us in. That was pretty fascinating on what it's like to be a twin. Divorce. So divorce can happen at any point, but it does tend to affect children in middle childhood a lot worse than children in early childhood. It also affects people in adolescence pretty bad as well. 45% of U.S. marriages end in divorce, and half of them involve children. And children of divorced parents usually spend a third of childhood in single-parent homes. And so because middle childhood represents a third of your childhood, and it's one in which your development is pretty sophisticated and also very sensitive, it can be especially devastating. Divorce often leads to instability in the home and a drop in parental income or in household income. So a lot of children may experience vast changes to their living conditions than what they were born with. Younger children tend to feel that they're to blame for divorce, and so this can really stunt your social development and make it very hard for you to emotionally handle a lot of things that happen. Girls tend to internalize the emotions associated with divorce, which means they usually are more depressed or sad. Boys externalize, which means that they tend to act out more and to process the emotions that they're feeling. In terms of long-term effects on development stabilizes after 2 years from the time of the divorce, but children of divorce do tend to perform at a lower rate in terms of their development, so it does stunt your development a little bit. That is only, though, that's the worst case scenario, and usually only when the divorce was especially contentious. In those situations where you have parents where both are acting maturely and remembering that they're not the only people being affected by this divorce and this breakup of a family, children tend to do really well. So if you have parents who are being very mature about it and are co-parenting and are being amicable and they're not bad-mouthing the other parent in front of the kids, those children tend to do very well and don't really see that many changes. I mean, it is hard to not live in the same home with your parents anymore, but it's not as bad if you feel, because the issue is, and this is what happens, and I can say this from personal experience. My grandparents got divorced when I was my freshman year of high school, and it was devastating, and it tore our family apart. This is my mom's mother. This is not the grandmother I was talking about earlier. When your parents go through a divorce, if one of your parents starts talking bad about the other, you enter into this very conflicted state where you feel loyal to your parent. You love both of your parents, but the first parent who starts bad-mouthing, that really activates negative feelings towards the other parent because you feel loyalty to your parents. On this other hand, though, you feel bad because you love the other parent too, and you don't want to think badly of them. And so it puts you in this really weird place, and it's especially awful when both of them are bad-mouthing each other, and they're saying completely different things. So then you're conflicted, and you feel like, well, if I'm loyal to one parent, then I'm rejecting the other. But if I reject the other, that goes against what I want as a person. And then if like your mom is saying your dad is an awful person, but you still love your dad, what does that mean about you? Are you an awful person too? And when you're a small child, you don't have the ability to process this in the same way as an adult. It's still hard for adults. My mom had a horrible time with her parents' divorce. Grandchildren had a hard time. One of my siblings, I remember saying that our grandmother didn't love us anymore because of the divorce. I mean, it was hard. It was very hard to go through, and I remember it being very painful and upsetting. And I remember it was so traumatic, and I didn't realize how traumatic it was. I was a junior in high school, and we were sitting at lunch, and one of my friends, I said something about how awful divorce is, and that it hurts people. And another one of my friends whose parents had gotten divorced when she was in elementary school said, "You have no right to talk about that. You have no idea what it's like." And I started crying. I literally started crying I never cry in front of people. And a teacher came and talked to me, and it was I've never told anyone that my grandparents were divorced before. I had not realized how much it hurt me. I ended up going home because I was so upset, and my mom talked to me about it. But it can be really devastating and this was an especially nasty divorce. Now, had it been different, I don't think it would have been a big deal, because I don't really have a good relationship with any of my grandparents, to be honest. But until I came out as transgender, I had a great relationship with both of my grandparents, both my mom's mother and my mom's father and his new wife. And it did make, it didn't even make holidays awkward. In fact, by the time I graduated from high school, everyone was mature enough that we could everyone be at my graduation, and it wasn't a big deal. And I organized my sister's wedding, and my mom's father and mom's mother sat together at the wedding. I was shocked. I didn't think it was going to happen. Everyone was so mature about it. But, that made it so much less stressful on everyone. And so I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like to go through that process younger. And also for it to be your parents. I've dated people too whose parents got divorced, and they were young, and it destroyed them. Their self-esteem was shot, and those relationships didn't last. And I think that I'm not 100% sure on this, but I feel like they didn't work out because those people were unable to trust me as a partner because of how contentious the parents' divorce had been. And I remember one of my partners saying, "I don't want to get married because I don't want to ever be in a situation where we're literally being manipulative of each other, trying to keep control of, if we see each other as monetary objects, or we're both trying to keep as much money as possible." And I'm like, "Honey, we'll never have any money to argue over." I spend it all. But yeah, divorce is awful. Let's move on. I hate this topic. It's making me sad. So 60% of divorced parents remarry within 3 years. So that's a fairly large number. Men tend to remarry quicker than women, but typically parents remarry within 3 years. And this new family structure really does help to stabilize the negative developmental effects of a divorce. And so it can be really helpful to remarriage, both to the parent and their emotional health as well as to the children. It is a very difficult adjustment at first, and it does take time. It's very gradual, because you're having to adjust to a new person, a new person's rules, and a new person's expectations. There's also, especially if you're in middle childhood and children in early childhood, they don't care. They tend to accept the parent. They're like, whatever. Not always, but for the most part, it's not a big deal. But for middle children and adolescents, it's a lot harder, because you're having to consider, a lot of times, you're like, well, how does dad feel, or how does mom feel about this? You don't want them to feel bad because this person's remarried, and you're having to adjust to a new person being in the position of your dad or mom. In families where the mother remarries, so in a mother-stepfather family, there's a much rougher adjustment. It's harder for children to adjust to a new father figure. But in father-stepmother families, the transition is a lot easier. It's not as hard, but it does tend to reduce parental contact. So if children live with mom and their dad remarries, they tend to not see their dad as much, because a lot of times he will focus on his new family, which is unfortunate. Mother remarrying does not tend to reduce parental contact because mother tends to be primary caregiver or custodial caregiver. Here's another topic that a lot of people are concerned about that I'm very happy to talk about and dispel myths. A lot of the women in this class have indicated that they want to work, and a lot of women feel guilty about wanting to work, like it's going to affect their children. And I'm very pleased to tell you that maternal employment does not have a negative impact on your development. In fact, children benefit when their mother works. They tend to have higher self-esteem, especially girls, because they see their mother in a position of competent authority. But they also benefit because the time that is spent together tends to be much more high quality. There tends to be much more positive family relationships. Families tend to have less gender stereotypes present. And their children actually have better academic performance when both parents work. It's pretty interesting. And another really cool thing that happens is that children are much more self-reliant. So when both parents are working, you don't always have someone at home picking up after you, or making you lunch, or packing your lunch, or getting you up and out to school every day. You have to do a little bit of stuff for yourself, and so that actually makes you much more competent as you grow up. Girls see marked improvement due to a strong same-sex role model, so having role models is incredibly important. Fathers also tend to take a more equal role in child-rearing, which is another reason why self-esteem and family relationships improve, because dad is being more involved than he typically would be if mom was primary caregiver, because the parents are having to balance out parental responsibilities. So if you're a woman and you want to work, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Also, I'll just put this out here. If you're a dad and you don't want to work and you want to be a dad and father, and or a husband and father, and that is your goal in life, guess what? The children are going to be just fine with that. Children do not care who their primary caregiver is. All children care about in early childhood is about whether or not they have some food in their belly and their diaper is changed on time and somebody's turning on the Netflix. That's literally all children care about. They want you to spend time with them. They want you to take care of them. They do not care who does it. They don't care if they have two dads. They don't care if they have two moms. They don't care if they have multiple parents. They don't care if they just have one. They just want someone to love them and take care of them. They literally do not care who it is. By middle childhood, if that bond is there, they don't care. They really don't. Children do not care. They just want to be loved. We all want to be loved. That's the reality. And so whether or not, you have two dads or two moms, or one dad or one mom, or any different combination of parents, or one of them works, or both of them work, or neither of them work, well, neither of them working would actually cause a lot of issues, because you need to, unless they, you're independently wealthy. As long as there's money, it doesn't really matter. Children are going to be fine. They're literally going to be fine. They need stability and they need love, and that's it. And if you can make it work, it doesn't matter who you are, how you identify. That's my plea for children. Children are amazing. Have children, adopt children. If you don't want children, that's great. Maybe give a little bit of money now and again to an orphanage. Children are great. I love them. I want to adopt them, and I want to have not 6, but maybe 2 or 3. And actually, I kind of want to adopt kids who nobody else wants. I literally would just go to the orphanage and say, I know that's not what you really do, but I would, when I was going through the adoption process, would be I just want the kids that nobody wants. So, if there's a child that's been waiting for a while, I'll foster to adopt. We'll make this happen, because I know what it's like to not be wanted. So that's my plea for children. Okay, and you're like, come on, Darcy, we're over time. Let's get going. All right, we have 2 or 3 slides left. Okay, mental health issues. So the primary issues that we see in terms of mental health are conduct disorders, which we've already kind of talked about, and it's not what I really want to discuss. Phobias are another that are really prevalent in middle childhood, and these develop in around 5% of school children. Phobias are intense, unmanageable fears. So, like being like afraid of spiders, being afraid of school, being afraid of leaving the house. These are all things that could be phobias. The symptoms that you experience when the symptoms you experience when you have a phobia are dizziness, nausea, stomach aches, vomiting at the thought of or exposure to a trigger. So if you're scared of, you have a phobia of spiders like I do, you feel dizzy, nauseous, have a stomach ache, vomit when you either think about spiders or you're exposed to one. The most common type that children have are school phobias, and this happens between around the age of 5 to 11 years old. So just being afraid of going to school. Along with that, I mean, the general depression can be experienced by middle children, anxiety. And a person's mental health issues are exacerbated by ethnic and political violence. And this affects about 27 million children across the world. 1 million have been separated from their families, and that increases mental health issues. 20 million children worldwide are homeless, and this increases your mental health issues. And 6 million have some form of physical disability, and this worsens mental health issues because we don't live in a society that's especially accommodating for people with physical disabilities. Another severe issue that affects children's mental health is child sexual abuse. All children are targeted, so it's not just it's not just girls who are sexually abused, boys are as well, but girls are much more likely to be targeted than boys. The typical abuser is a white, straight man, tends to be known to the victim and their family, and abuses through the use of power, coercion, and guilt. So they tell the child, if you tell, you're going to get hurt, you're going to get in trouble, I'll hurt your family, or you're bad for doing this. If you tell people, you're going to get in trouble. And they're in a position of power, so it's hard for the child to say no. The outcomes from child sexual abuse include serious mental health issues and academic failure, and so this can have an incredibly negative impact on a person's development. It also increases the risk for risky sexual behaviors in adolescence and adulthood, and also becoming a victim abuser in adolescence or adulthood. A victim abuser is someone who abuses themselves, but it's because they themselves were abused. They were a victim, and so they just perpetuate abuse. And unfortunately, that's how child sexual abuse really occurs. A lot of the time is people are abused, and they don't process that abuse. And then if it was very early on, they don't see anything wrong with it because their brain was rewired. It's really, really tragic. And I think it's important for us to talk about this because we don't as a society, and this continues to happen. And as human service providers, you will be what's called a mandated reporter, and you'll have to report this, and it's important for you to at least have some concept of what it looks like. And so this is by no means an adequate explanation, but I just want you to think about this and the importance of preventing it, because it can really have a negative impact on children. Alright, your discussion's pretty easy. Tell me, what is one thing you've learned in developmental psychology so far that surprises you? This just helps me evaluate where we are at midterm in terms of what you've learned. So what is one thing you've learned that surprises you? Please make your subject discussion 3 and put it in the week 3 discussion board. Discussion 13 in the week 3 discussion board. Alright, that's it. Thanks for listening and for putting up with me being very long-winded tonight. Read the chapter summary for the reading for tonight, and then read all the unit summaries. Ask your questions, attend the review session. which is tonight at 5. Remember, the exam opens tonight at 11:59 and closes tomorrow at 11:59 p.m. Alright, have a good day. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll either see you tonight at the review or I'll see you on Thursday. Have a great exam and a great weekend. Great long weekend.